Hey you guys, this is book review number 5, the last review that I'm going to do for the day. Of course there'll be more in the future, but this will be the last one for now. The book I'm going to review today is a book called In Siberia by Colin Thubron. Thubron. I think that's Thubron. Yeah. And I really enjoyed this book. This is a very good book. In it, Colin Thubron travels from the Urals Mountains, so the edge of Siberia in Russia, all the way to the far east coast in Magadan, Russia. Either using the Trans-Siberian or limited plane flights or even river travel. What I really enjoyed about this book was how he described the depravity that exists in Siberia without fetishizing it. A lot of books that focus on, particularly in modern times, how modern suffering exists, often try to console the reader through some sort of larger theme, or just in general kind of bastardize the suffering involved in the area, not by downplaying it, but by almost overplaying it in order to gain sympathy for its own sake, without any sort of action being taken, or like I said, just sort of fetishizing suffering. But what I felt Colin Thubron really did well in this book is he showed the suffering, but showed it through the individuals involved, through their circumstances, through how they got through it on a day-to-day basis, through their delusions and their clear-eyed thinking, both directions, through their stubbornness, through their broken spirits. Now I'm using didactic words, but I just really felt he did a good job on it. I guess just a couple of key areas that I enjoyed. I enjoyed the babushkas, as they were called, sort of the old women, traditional believers that are just outside of the Urals Mountains. He visited a group of them at a local hot spring. He visited a traditional shamanist from, well, it doesn't say what the area is called, but it's near the Altai Mountains. It's sort of an old Mongolian tribe that didn't incorporate into Mongolia, but incorporated into Russia. An old shaman whose ways are dying out in the face of modernity, but not real modernity, just sort of like a vague dying of old culture. I enjoyed when he went up into the north, both in Vorkuta, which was an old pit mining establishment where people were worked to death in the pit mines with in coal mines with no form of positive stimulation. Their entire life was just working until you died. And I feel like what he really did well there was not necessarily describe the depravity, but just describe the lack of positivity, or the lack of the opposite of depravity, and how that just generally wore out souls. It was the work, but it wasn't just the work. It was the lack of meaning within these individual persons' lives, or whatever small meaning they could make, but that would be insignificant compared to the overwhelming fact that they would die in these pit mines. I also enjoyed when he went to the town of Norilsk, which is up the Yena River, I believe. Yes. I'm going to readjust here. Up the Yena River, where alcoholism is rampant, there used to be a old fox skin producing factory, but all the foxes are dying because no one is taking care of them. How there are just limited resources available to these people, and they can't really escape. I mean, they can physically escape off the one barge that comes once a week up the Yena River to provide resources, but really are sort of trapped within their community. It's not as bleak as Vorkuta, which I should say was shut down. He was talking about the historical Vorkuta 50 years ago. But it's kind of a trapping in its own way, in its own, if it's not a government trap, it's the social trap of just being in a situation that you can't get out of, where you're limited to society, even though it is limited. It's overwhelming in that you have no possibilities outside of it. He also talked about the historic town of Iroquois and how it was a popular area for it was an area that old czarists who had fallen out of favor, or people that were around the czar who had fallen out of favor, were sent to, and the old historical buildings there, which in their beauty contrasted greatly with the lack of environs. He also talked about some of the old believers in this area and how they held on to values that were, we would say, antiquated, such as, the way that you made the sign of the cross was not with 2 fingers, but was with 3 fingers, and how people would just refuse to interact with other Russians because of this fact, and had just completely separated themselves. And how, when he brought up the fact that this might not matter, the group was just exasperated and couldn't believe that anything else would be as such. And just, they actually described 2 groups of old believers, which are like the old Orthodoxy before Orthodoxy modernized. About how the group that refused to drink ran a more structured society, whereas another group that allowed for drinking ran a more ramshackled society. And you would think in the West that such distinctions would have relative lack of importance upon how their society, particularly involving religion, evolved. But in an area as stark as Siberia, such minor differences really matter in how people live their lives. Even a minor slip-off that wouldn't be considered a minor slip-off in the West can lead to great depravity. He also talked sort of about the interactions between the Chinese and the Russians along the border, and how they're fought, and how the Russian Europeans, who, well, I guess they're Asiatic now, but had Russian ancestry, were kind of having trouble dealing with the how China was arising and its southern neighbor was becoming much more powerful. Not necessarily along the whole scope of both countries, but even like along the areas of the border, how the Chinese were more prosperous than the Europeans, which previously would have never been the case. He also talked about a Jewish community that had lost almost all its believers to Israel, and now was pretty much just a ghost town for tourist reasons, the few tourists that came through there, and was really very economically depressed. And the few Jews that did live there, their one desire, their one hope in life was to move to Israel, even though some had that opportunity and others did not. And finally, he ended on the, I should say that this isn't everything he covered, but it's just a few snippets that I enjoyed particularly. He finally ended up on the coast of Magadan, ending the book where Joseph Stalin had its largest gulags and killed hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, essentially working them to death, much like the area of Vorkuta. But I feel like this area, if you went there, it wasn't just because you were going to a work camp, but it was because you were truly a dissident, but maybe not a dissident in a large faction, but just a minor dissident within society, which was intolerable under the utopian Soviet principle. And it just, he talked about how because it was permafrost, that bodies would just rise to the surface and you see them frozen in the middle of, the forest. And then just how stark that was. And once again, I just want to emphasize how much I enjoyed this book. It really was a good book. The best way I can put it is stark but realistic, describing suffering, but not using that as exclusively just to draw sympathy to sell more books. And, just in general, very, very vivid in my mind, the areas that he traveled to and the areas that he went to. Well, anyway, one more time. The book is In Siberia by Colin Thubron. I'm going to have to say it one more time. Thubron. Show it to you. There's the author. You guys can pronounce it, let me know. In Siberia. It was a great book. Highly recommended. Read it. If you're seeing this, read it. It's a great book if you're interested in travel or Russia or whatever. Read it. It's a great book. Well, anyway, thanks for viewing, you guys. I'll see you next time.